now my great pleasure to introduce to you the Federal Assistant Secretary, Lori-Anne Sharp, who's going to give us a federal office update. And I don't know if you're aware, but the ANMF, in all of its versions, but the Federation has been 100 years strong. So that's a long time to be around as a union. So please make Lori-Anne welcome. She's got lots of fun things to share with you today, and if we've got a little bit of time, we're going to show a video at the end. Is that right? Yeah. Great. Thanks, Lori-Anne. In your hands.
Thanks very much, Sally, and hello, delegates. I'd like to thank Sally and Sarah and Grant and all of the QNMU Branch Council for inviting me to speak today. I've got a presentation that goes for about 20 minutes to try and sum up the last 12 months and also give you a bit of an update on what the other branches of the Federation are doing around the country. And as Sally mentioned, we are 100 years old this year, so we're going to have a celebration in October, and I'll tell you a little bit about that as well. But before I start, I'd just like to I wish to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the Turrbal people here in Brisbane, as the traditional custodians of the land and the world's oldest surviving culture. I pay my respects to elders past, present and future and recognise their continuing connection to land and community and culture. Now this is my... Yes. Great, fantastic. So I understand that there's a lot of new delegates in the room today who I probably haven't met before. So I've been in this position for about 7 years now, and I've been coming and giving this presentation for at least the last 3. Annie Butler is an apology because she is at a conference in Adelaide today. So I'd just like to introduce myself a little bit. I am a registered nurse. I first started my nursing in country Victoria, and I had planned to study media studies and politics, but a good friend of mine who was doing nursing at the time said, I think you should come to the open day at uni, and the rest is history. I did work in country rural hospital, but I lost a close relative when I was doing my graduate nursing around Christmas time, so I left the hospital system and entered community health, and there I worked for about 2 decades with the Royal District Nursing Service, and I spent about 12 years working for the Homeless Persons Program. So I was an outreach nurse, and I worked very closely with one of the big hospitals in Melbourne. And then I've also had the pleasure of working in this state at the Cairns Space Hospital and overseas. So, yeah. But during my nursing career, I was a very active delegate and involved in a lot of the negotiating for EAs. And I was also a member of the Victorian Branch Council for 15 years. So I'd certainly learnt a lot. So it was a really big step up, but it was a great pleasure to get into this position. So here's the leadership team. As you know, your wonderful president, Sally-Anne Jones, James Lloyd, who's from Tasmania, and he's the federal vice president, and Annie Butler there, who's our federal secretary. And this photo was taken at our biennial conference last year in Coogee, which I think some of you in this room were there. So I'm just going to give you an update of a few changes that have happened in the last 12 months. As you've got your very own Sarah Beeman there, who's been appointed as a secretary. We've also had some changes to the ACT branch secretary. We said goodbye to Matthew Daniel, and Carolyn Fido is now in that position. And we have some new presidents in NT, Naomi, and in WA, Loretta. Now, this looks like a really boring slide, but bear with me because I think the picture does tell 1,000 words, and I'll make no assumptions because you guys are the QNMU, but you're also part of a federated structure in the ANMF. So I have in the past, when I've taken QNMU members on lobbying excursions to Parliament, not be fully aware, and fair enough, that they weren't part of this bigger organisation, the ANMF, because you are a state registered union, but you also come under the federal as the federated structure. So that just sort of gives you a bit of a sense that, you know, we are part of this big national union, and we can use that influence of numbers to lobby and make change around healthcare and working conditions for nurses and midwives and carers. So the ANMF is a registered organisation under the Fair Work Act. And as I mentioned, it's got branches in every state and territory, all with their own democratic processes of electing their job reps, their branch officials, their secretaries. Now, because Sally said we've got a little bit of time, but I'm not going to ramble on because I know there's a cocktail party to get to. And I just want to we'll do a little, before I show the next slide, because I think the next slide's probably the most exciting, but just to get a sense, hands up those who think we've got over 100,000 members nationally. Correct? You guys, I don't know if you're allowed to play this game. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up if you think we've got over 150,000 members nationally. Keep your hands up if you think we've got over 180,000. You guys are pretty good. Over 200. Okay. Keep your hands up if you think we've got over 250. I haven't got a prize, by the way, but there will be glory. Okay, so we've still got a few hands up. Keep your hands up if you think we've got over 280. This is nationally. Keep your hands up if you think we've got over 300,000. Okay, a few hands going down. Keep your hands up if you think we've got over 320,000. Well, all you people, give yourselves a clap because you are correct. So as of the 31st of December last year, we had 326,785 members. So just, when you're feeling a little bit lost and lonely out in those workplaces and those employees are giving you a really hard time, think about all those people that have got your back and you're part of that really big membership number. Okay, so as you know, from the strength of that membership, that leads to, many successful campaigns and influence. ANMF members across the country have been campaigning for change in aged care for decades, and I know that there's many of you in the room have been part of that. We have seen reform starting to happen, and the catalyst really was the 2022 federal election, where we were able to get election commitments from ALP and finally make them realised. Now, this did not happen easily. We had members from all across the country and in QNMU, rallies, trips to Parliament, letters to politicians, organising in the workplace. It was phenomenal. And because of that, we've been able to achieve great things in aged care, and we really got aged care on the agenda in that election. And I know this is probably old news to some of you now, but it is certainly worth highlighting. Because of the members and their activism, we now have a national law that means a registered nurse has to be in a nursing home 24/7. We've got aged care pay is rising. We've had the interim decision with the 15%. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the work value case briefly later. And there is more to come for personal care workers and AINs who are working in aged care. And we've also finally had the introduction of minimum mandated minutes, which will be uplifted again in October this year. Now, it's all really exciting and it's really great reform, but we all know that unless there's proper implementation and job reps and delegates and people on the ground enforcing this with support from their union, nothing will change. We've had a bad culture in aged care for decades, and whilst the ship's turned around, there's still many more challenges to resolve, and we still have to fix EN minutes as well in the mandated. So and because, we'll never have an election like we had last time where the focus was on aged care, so we have to think very strategically about how we do that now, because the community think that, unless they've got a relative in aged care or they work in aged care, that it's been fixed, and we know that that's not the truth. So, the work of the ANMF is driven, of course, by its members, and this photo is of the lovely QNMU bunch at our biennial conference in October last year, which is where the debate and all the discussion and the setting of all the ANMF priorities really happens. And if you do ever get an opportunity to go to one, I can highly recommend it, because it's a really fantastic opportunity to connect with your national colleagues as well, and you'll find you'll have a lot in common. So obviously we continue to focus on the workforce reform, recruitment, retention, and retention including for students as well. Aged care reform will continue, increasing equity in healthcare and gender equity and industrial relations reform. And I just, I mean, everyone's got their Yes T-shirts on there, and I just wanted to, mention that despite the devastating result on October the 14th last year, where, the country overwhelmingly did say no, basically to a non-binding steering committee, the union movement managed to produce a 70% yes. So I think that that's something that we could definitely be proud of. There was many unionists who were doing a lot of campaigning around that time, and experienced some pretty racist abuse, and I just think it needs to be acknowledged. It was very difficult for many people. I guess looking on the upside too, 40% of the country did vote positively, but there's obviously a lot of work to be done. Okay, so as I briefly mentioned before, the work value case has been a very significant piece of work for the Federal Office and its legal team, and also for the branches as well, because we've had to get witnesses, which is the members, to talk about their experience and to progress the case. So early this year, the Fair Work Commission handed down its final decision for the aged care work value case, which was stage 3. Now, it does get a little bit confusing because there's a number of stages, and there's also another application that's still going on now. At the stage 3 decision, it determined that direct care aged care workers, for work value reasons, should receive award rates that are substantially beyond the 15%, which was determined in the first stage. So personal care workers and AINs will receive a further increase to award rates, with some of them now receiving up to 28% from where they were. And that's for award wages. But we all know that when you lift award wages, it increases the benchmark. So when you're, negotiating enterprise bargaining agreement, you're starting at a higher bar. That 28%, which is inclusive of the 15, I hope I'm not confusing people, that we did obviously argue for that to commence on 1 July this year. We didn't win that argument because the government wanted it to be much more phased out than that, and they put in a submission to Fair Work. So it's actually going to be introduced in 2 stages. It's going to be introduced, 50% of it will be 1 Jan next year, and then the other 50% will be in October next year. So, progress can be slow, but it is going in the right direction. So how I mentioned, there's another application at play, and that's the second work value application for the entire Nurses Award. So we actually have those hearing dates that have just been issued in the last couple of weeks. I've been on annual leave, so I'm not exactly sure when they came out, but they'll be in September this year. So once again, all the branches around the country will be talking to their members, will be getting witness statements, some will be giving evidence, and then we hope to see an uplift in nurses' award wages in the not too distant future as well. So the 2024 decision and the ANMF applications to vary the Nurses Award will see the end of really over a century, actually, of undervaluation of women's work. And this is just, it's really fantastic work, and it is historical. Some other historical wins. It's been a really good 12 months. As you know, the paid parental leave is going up in increments every year. It's, I think we're up to 22 weeks as of 1 July. Next year it'll go to 24 weeks, and then in 2026 it'll be 26 weeks. We've also won now superannuation on paid parental leave, because guess what? We didn't have it. And I just want to thank, I think there's some members in the group that did come to Parliament with me, and we met over like 67 politicians there back in 21 and 22 with 2 other unions, where we really argued for this. And I mean, one of the delegates was pregnant with her 4th child, and had taken 3 lots of maternity leave and never been paid super on that. And we worked out that she's about $35,000 worse off in retirement because of not getting that. And she walked those halls of Parliament 36 weeks pregnant. I was very, very proud of her. So that's coming. Also, and I know that you guys have had a great year because you've also won super guarantee on the unpaid amount, which is absolutely fantastic and how it should be. So congratulations on that. I'm passionate about super because I sat on a super board for about 5 years while I was in this role. So I nurses and midwives and carers work really, really hard, and they deserve to have a dignified retirement when they get there. So the great news is that it's gone up to 11.5% as of 1 July, so check your pay slips, I'm sure you are. And then next year it'll be at 12%. And that, just to remind everyone, that wasn't a given. You know, the Labor Party were going cold on that legislated increase to 12%. It was union members, nurses and midwives and carers who went to Parliament and said it has to be 12%, and they listened to us, and, you know, we finally got it. And that's going to be absolutely generational change for some of the younger members. I think they won't retire into poverty, because we know that middle-aged woman cohort is one of the highest risks of homelessness in retirement. So how's the time, Madam President?
You could do about 10 minutes.
Okay, great. It's all about the wins. As a result of the University Accord and continuing lobbying, not just from our union, but some of the other unions, including the Teachers' Union, in the federal budget this year, they introduced a prac payment placement to address some of the poverty that's experienced in for students. You know, it's great, it's really great news, but sadly it's not coming in until next year. I think it's about $320 a week for when nurses and midwives are required to attend to their clinical placements. It's really good. Also combined with some of the HEX debt relief, this will make a big difference. You know, in Victoria there's been nursing undergrads have a HEX free actually. I think this is the last year of the cohort to go through. But you know, some of those things, and with the scholarships to become a nurse practitioner or endorsed midwife, and some increased Medicare access to midwives too. These things will definitely help, and there's more of a pathway for those undergraduates. They can see some support and hopefully, you know, are retained in the healthcare professions. So obviously there's been, I don't know how many of you know about this, but there's been other health reform that's progressing really well also with the change of government. We've got the National Workforce Strategy, there's midwifery projects underway. We've had the removal of collaborative arrangements for nurse practitioners and endorsed midwives, which that legislation comes into effect on the 1st of November this year. Last October, the government launched Unleashing the Potential of Our Healthcare Workforce, and with the Scope of Practice review. And this came out of the Medicare Task Force review. Sounds all a bit boring, doesn't it, all these reviews? But ANMF have had a seat at that table, so it just gives you a bit of a breadth of some of the, the work that's done at the federal office, because there are a lot of committees and advisory boards, so all of these things get progressed. And the Scope of Practice review is very welcome, and hopefully that will, unleash a lot of potential for nurses and midwives and nurse-led clinics and all types of things. And there's been a great collaboration with hopefully you can see it on the slide, with APNA, ACN, CATSNM and ACM around progressing that as well. So they're aiming to deliver better health outcomes for the community, greater job satisfaction, and obviously improve recruitment and retention. Now I'm just going to do a quick wrap around the country. This is the Victorian branch. You might have heard in the news, they just recently had industrial action, and their public sector EBA was recently agreed upon. They managed to negotiate, they do have a Labor government, a 28.5% increase in pay. Yeah, it's fantastic. Hard fought over 4 years, that's compounded, and they've got a lot of improved conditions as well in the EA, which is quite extensive. It's a great little booklet out actually on the Vic Branch ANMF website if you're ever interested. But they secured a lot of improvements in rostering, the things that are really important in the everyday. So and there's also industrial action going on by one of the big private sectors. You guys know Bolton Clark because they're up in this state too. Actually, they were previously RDNS. They used to be good employers who I used to work for, and they're taking protected industrial action at the moment. I don't think they've had a pay rise. I think the last one they had was 2%, and I think it's about 5 years ago. So that's just nuts and not accepted. So they've got a really good campaign, Bolton Clark, Thaw Your Frozen Heart. And it's just gone everywhere in Victoria, and they've started riding on the cars and everything. And I just know, I remember the culture there. they would be hating that. But anyway, they're progressing and good on them. New South Wales, they're pursuing a 15% pay rise for 2024. So they're currently in industrial action staggered around the state at the moment. They've had a change in their leadership too, and in the last couple of years. And on June the 14th, their ratio rollouts commenced, which was, no short feat. And they're going to be delivered in stages, those ratio rollouts, over the next 3 years. You guys are probably thinking, we've got that, we've done that. Hang on, that's not Tassie,
No,
that's South Australia. Where have I got South Australia? I think I've got my...
Tassie's next.
Anyway, South Australia have done great work in the rural and remote areas, and they're increasing nurse and midwives numbers as well, and they're also progressing ratios. They aren't quite obviously at the legislature, but they are continuing. And the great thing is they've got other states, and the work of other states to go from, so it's really fantastic. Tassie, they secured public sector wage increases for nurses and midwives between the 14 and the 15% mark over the 4 years, and they're continuing also their fight for safe stuff. It's pretty difficult down there. They've got a pretty hostile government. Did that click? No. Who have I got there?
That looks like ACT.
Yeah, ACT. I don't know what's happened here. It's all sort of moved around. ACT, they've had dedicated funding in the last budget to recruit more than 130 nurses full-time, and that's to support their second rollout, their second phase of the rollout of ratios. Here we go. And NT's one of the smaller branches. They're about 2,500 members. Lots of challenges because of the geography and, the rural and remote and isolated areas. But they're being very focused currently on it's a stop fracking campaign. Be careful how I say that. It's late in the day. Stop fracking, because of the potential, obviously, negative impacts and climate change as well. So they've been getting a lot of really good publicity there. And WA, I don't have a photo, I'm sorry, but they are campaigning for safe staffing and ratios, and also a 5% pay rise in the health sector this year. I was just over in WA for a holiday, and honestly, they should be able to have everything they ask for, because that's one of the most wealthiest states. Yeah. Like the infrastructure, the roads, everything. It just spoke of lots of money, and so I hope that they get what they...
Gina won't want to drive over.
No, that's right. Yeah. I don't think I'm pressing this hard enough. Yeah, great. So this is just a very quick snapshot of ANMF's international work. And I know that you've had Lachlan here this morning. Do you guys remember Lachlan from AFIDA? Yeah, AFIDA Union Aid Abroad. I'm a member. I'm also on the board of AFIDA. It's one of the roles that I have in as the Federal Assistant Secretary. And I've just recently stepped up to take an interim chair role, which was uncanny timing because they're having to be going through accreditation with DFAT next week. So I'm have to going through that process with them. AFIDA are a really great organisation. They do fantastic international work in building up grassroots union movement overseas. So I think Lachlan probably told you about the asbestos campaign in East Timor. They're fighting for a minimum wage. There's also the Domestic Working Women's Centre over there that are trying to professionalise that and make sure that they get adequate pay and that they're safe in their work. And I had the pleasure of going over there last August to do a study tour, and I got to meet people and go into some of the country areas and see it firsthand, and it's extraordinary work what they're doing. And that AFIDA, Lachlan would have told you, but started by a nurse who was in Lebanon. So, a really proud and connected history to the ANMF. And it's been, in this time of conflict too, it's been very helpful to be a member of AFIDA because we've been able to, unions always had a proud history of standing up for the oppressed. So with the Gaza conflict and the Ukraine conflict, we've been able to support some of our support organisations over there that we had in Gaza, and provide some practical support as well through donations. So that's been really good. We play the secretariat role for the South Pacific Nurses Forum. That's been going for, I think well over a decade and a half. It did have a bit of hiatus during COVID, obviously. We tried to have one on Zoom. It was an absolute disaster. And that was the first year I took, over that. But we just recently had one in PNG and it went fabulously. 5 days, really great experience, and they really did put an amazing conference on. And that picture to your... So it's to your left, where all those Papua New Guinea nurses in their green dress. They're all from the Enga province. Remember recently they had those terrible landslides? Yeah. This was about 10 days after that event and they came down. I mean, it was quite extraordinary, the devastation and the fear still that people have there. But, really, really great experience. And that's Annie in the top there with... she's a Polish nurse this was at ICN in Montreal last year, who had been working in Ukraine during the conflict. So we're also a member of ICN, the International Council of Nurses, and we're also a member of the Commonwealth Nurses and Midwives Federation, and they're having their conference. We have a board position on that, and the good news is I just submitted an abstract to take the National Nurses Midwives Health Program, which I know you've heard about too, globally, and they've accepted that. So we're going to plant that hook. So all of these things will help get that embedded into the future and not be dependent on the whim of government and funding. So on that note, this is, I know you've heard about it, but it's such an exciting thing. And, this has been one from the union movement. Don't let anyone else tell you anything differently. This started in Victoria over 12 years ago, and there was a very good model to go on. The ANMF lobbied the then opposition government, Albanese, and they committed to some funding. Next thing you know, the ANMF are project managing it, and now it's got its own entity, separate board. You've met Heather, you've heard from Heather. She's been appointed as the CEO, which is great. We had the official launch in April. It's bittersweet because they have been really busy, but none of you in this room are probably surprised to hear that. There's the phone number. Write it down, take a photo, if not for yourself, for your colleagues. You never know when you're going to need it. This is a service that is run by professionals, nurses and midwives, for nurses and midwives. So confidential, free, referral on if needed, but I think it's really great. If you didn't grab a fridge magnet, take the number. You never know when you might need it for yourself or your colleague. And now if I click the next button, it's not going to play it, is it?
I don't know.
No, well,
just
to be
play?
careful. Oh no, then I'm not going to press it yet. How's the time?
You're good to do this bit.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
perfect,
Good.
yeah.
So as Sally mentioned, and as we celebrate 326,000 members, I mean, we are the largest union in the country. Yeah. We are the strongest union in the country. And we're going to make sure we keep it that way. So we're going to use this year, we're going to have a celebration in October. There'll be a week of events. We'll communicate it through the branches. It'll be in the journals. I hope that, you guys might be able to do something at your workplaces and that we can feature that in our journal and on our socials and all of those sort of things. There'll be cake. Hopefully there'll be cake in every facility in Australia. We're going to invite the Prime Minister and the Governor-General to this because we see it as a really good opportunity to highlight the work of nurses and midwives and carers. It's also an opportunity to reflect on the extraordinary strides that have been made by nurses and midwives and carers before us, and of our mighty union, to celebrate that and just the significant contribution that's had to improving the lives of the healthcare system and Australians. So on that note, really great to meet you all. Look forward, I'm coming to the dinner, so I hope to have a dance, and I'm going to play this video. Enjoy. I don't know if we want the lights out, sound up, all that.
Yep.
Cool, got it.
Good.
Okay, pressing button.